folks, it's Darcy from the Purposeful and today we're going to talk about how to take a dehydrating project that goes wrong and do something different with it. If you caught my dragon fruit video I guess about 2 weeks ago, I don't know how many weeks ago it was by the time you see this. I'll leave the link up in the iCards here or down below. It was a project that I went, meh, this wasn't one that was that fun, and I don't know that I would do this one again. But instead of just taking a dehydrating project that you do, that you're experimenting with something new, or you're just learning and you're not quite getting it right the first time, there's no reason to waste a project. Very few reasons that you need to just go ahead and throw things away when you're dehydrating. Those things would be that you've generated mold of any kind in a jar, toss it. Just toss the entire thing. Sanitize your jar and just try again later. Because if you see mold in one spot, it's already growing throughout the rest of the jar. Maybe just be small bits, but it's there, even if you can't see it. So before we get started with the list, something I really want to encourage those of you who are just starting out, that projects that don't go the way that you expected are not a waste. I know that when you first start preserving things that a lot of people have a hard time with the idea of it because they're so afraid of food waste. They're afraid of having spent the little bit of money they have on bulking, buying a larger supply of a particular fruit or vegetable. They're going to dry it, but they're just so afraid that they're not going to like it and they've wasted that money. I know that there are people in the world who don't have enough food. So I don't want to minimize the idea that you can just nonchalantly do whatever you want with your food and it doesn't matter. But what I mean is as you're learning how to preserve food, and if a project doesn't go the way you'd hoped and it doesn't taste great, you're learning a better way to do it so that you don't waste food down the road because you've figured out how to make it work better for you. So let's get started on the list of things that you can do with dehydrator projects that may not have turned out the way you'd hoped, but that you can make use of them a second way. I know a bunch of you can probably guess the first one I'm going to say, and that would be powder it. Even if you can't eat the product, like let's say whatever you do, whether it be fruit leathers that maybe you dried too long or you dried it too hot and it got brittle. My family actually likes brittle fruit leather better than we like the chewy stuff, but if it got too brittle and it really doesn't roll and you don't know what else to do with it, grind it up into a powder, dry the powder again by putting it into like either coffee filters or muffin cups or cupcake cups, or a bowl with a lid on it, some kind of like parchment paper. Or what I do is I just put it on a cookie sheet and put it back in the oven. After the oven's been warmed to the lowest temperature, I turn the oven off and then I just put the cookie sheet in there and it dries the powder. You can do that and then use it in so many ways to put in yogurt, in oatmeal, in muffins, in your smoothies, in a bunch of different ways. And I'll leave a link down below in the description box about a bunch of different ways you can use fruit powders. But you can do it with vegetables that maybe you didn't like how they turned out because your texture preference just doesn't like them. Powder them and add them to vegetable powder, and just use that to put into anything that you're cooking and just add some extra vegetable nutrition. Very few times does a vegetable powder actually add any flavor to the dish that you're making unless you've used one particular vegetable that is normally very strong flavored, like peas or broccoli, and all of your mixes mostly that vegetable or really high proportion that vegetable, and then you put that into a dish that's not very like you put it into an Alfredo sauce, maybe it will bring that big flavor into something that's more delicate. So you would just want to watch that a little bit. But vegetable powders are easy. And with all of these ideas that if I have something, I will drop a link down below that I talk about on the blog, or if I've got another video that I talk more specifically about it. And the same goes with if you're doing greens, and as long as you don't use oil on it to try to make chips. If you're doing greens and go, I can't figure out how to use these like the green, a green chip, I don't know what to do with this, and you can't really find a way, mostly what I would do is either crunch it up and just do flakes that I add to a meal, or I powder it and put it in green powder, because green powder is what I use most in our house. I use it all the time. I've got a big canister of it going all the time, and it's what I just process through a lot. But that's one way that you can use a project that didn't go well. Some people have asked if you can if you can powder beef jerky. You can. You need to get it really super dry. You can powder it. You still need to store it in the freezer because the fats that are inherent in meats and the proteins that they're not cured are not best kept on the shelf, but you can still store it in the freezer, and you can use it to add to, maybe if you've got a pet, you can add that, as long as you didn't use a really salty marinade. And if the marinade is pet friendly, then you can actually use that to give your dogs and cats a little extra nutrition too. You can put it in stew just to add a little bit. The next thing, you can add it to a casserole. A typical use of dehydrated foods already, you're learning how to dehydrate and you just did a food, and then you, like, let's just take peas for an example. We hate peas in our house. So if I were to dehydrate peas and then try to rehydrate peas and put them on as a side dish, we would not like them. But maybe you like peas normally, but you tried this particular vegetable, you made it as a side dish because you thought that it would make a great side dish, and comes to find out that it just doesn't. It doesn't really translate well into a food on its own. The best thing to do with it before any other thing is just go ahead and put it in a really good dense soup or stew. It's a good way to allow it to simmer for a really long time, because part of the problem with dehydrating vegetables is that people don't remember they still need to cook. You blanch it, many of them, to make sure that you're protecting the nutrients and the colors, but they still need some time to actually cook. So when you put them in a soup or a stew that has to simmer for a while, then it integrates better and you can eat it included in something, which is what most vegetables really want to have happen. You can also, if you don't want to powder something so much, you can actually flake it, where you do like a loose grind of it. That might make it to where maybe you don't like the whole of that vegetable when it's dry, but maybe you could do it in smaller bits without a powder that you could add to soup, and that way it's a little easier to eat. Like, okay, let's just take the peas again, because if I were to add peas to anything in any meal that we have, my whole family would just go, oh, this is just so gross. But if I wanted to add it to bulk something up, but I didn't want it whole, I could actually just do a really loose grind of it and add it in something, and probably be able to pass it much easier within that dish, because it would break the flavor up some, so you don't have that dense flavor, and it would just kind of mellow it out within the whole dish and add a little bulk, add a little flavor, but not in whole vegetables. So this could be particularly good for those of you who have texture sensitive people who don't not like the flavor but don't like the texture. For us, mushrooms is one of those things that dried mushrooms in food, not all of us like that spongy flavor, the chewy flavor of a dehydrated mushroom that's been rehydrated into something. What I do is make a powder out of it, but what I can also do is actually do a rough chop of it, and having it in smaller pieces is less of that spongy thing that you're trying to bite into. So if you don't like texture, break it up a little bit. Not necessarily into a full powder, but just break it up a little bit. Okay, so a third thing is you can just add it to smoothies, even vegetables. You can sneak vegetables into your smoothies, and it's okay. With dehydrated fruits and vegetables, if you want to put it in your smoothies, it's really good to powder it first, and then add it, because some things, when they go into a smoothie, like especially with fruits, they may still stay that kind of chewy consistency. But if you've got a really powerful smoothie maker, it'll chop up a lot of that stuff, so it really won't matter. But if you're finding that you can't integrate it well, you can powder it first and throw it in there if that works for you. But it's another way to use something that you might not normally have eaten and put it into a smoothie to hide it. I'd be careful about what you add, because some things will flavor pretty heavily. Like, I wouldn't necessarily add broccoli to a smoothie, because that flavor may not be that easy to hide. But there are a lot of things that you can just like put into a smoothie that you can hide it pretty well. Okay. So a fourth way. Some of these ways are not necessarily something that you would do, or they're ways to use things that make it not wasteful, even if you don't actually eat it yourself. But, of course, feed it to your animals. A lot of people will toss dehydrated foods that they can't use, or kind of going bad, out to their chickens or their hogs, or whatever they're whatever they're raising for farm animals. With some things with dogs, you can actually give them some things. You have to be careful to know what your dog can and can't eat, and make sure you don't give them too much at one time, because a bunch of dehydrated food at one time can actually be problematic for digestion, because it's using so much water in your system to process it. But you can feed some to that way. We give some of our dehydrated foods to our rabbit. She likes some things, but not others, but we'll give her some things. But there's always an easy way that if you can't use it, toss it out to your animals. And also, you can compost it. Now, if you have a compost pile in your garden, putting dehydrated foods out there is just fine. And it's a great way to use them. You're not wasting it at all. Some people will think that the only way I can have a no-waste kitchen is to consume everything that you eat, when in fact, a no-waste kitchen doesn't mean that. It means that you're not throwing it into the garbage to put into the city garbage or a community garbage pile, that you're actually reusing the food in some way. So putting in compost is putting that food's nutrition back into the soil to grow more food for your family if you're a gardener. So don't ever think that just throwing it out into a compost pile is a problem. All right, so another thing you can do, this is specifically for fruits, but I've heard some people do it with some vegetables, depending on how sweet those vegetables are, but add it to your ice cream. It gives your ice cream a kind of chewy texture with some fruity bits in it that make it taste good, and it's a way that you can add something that you might not like to eat it straight, that chopped up a little bit and put into ice cream might make it easier for you to eat, to swallow, to be able to eat, if you don't necessarily like it by itself. Flaked fruit leather on ice cream is really fun, and it's a great way that if you've got it too brittle, it's a great way to add a little texture to ice cream that makes it kind of fun to eat. Thing that you can do, this might be mostly for fruits, but with some sweeter vegetables you might be able to do as well. You can actually rehydrate it some, add some applesauce to it, and then make a fruit leather out of it. So maybe you dehydrated some apricots that you just don't like. So think about rehydrating them, pureeing them, adding some applesauce, and then you've got apricot fruit leather that you can eat that you might enjoy more than if you were just eating the fruit itself. You can do that with a variety of fruits that may work better for you that way. And you can mix and match them. The flavor combinations you can make for fruit leathers are awesome. You can add some vegetables to fruit leather as well. So it's go and look online and kind of find some like butternut squash, pumpkin. Some of the sweeter vegetables actually do really well pureed and added as part of a fruit leather that you might want to add some applesauce to make it more pliable, and add a little sweetness if there's not quite enough. But those are the things that you can do, and there are tons and tons of recipes online. So another thing that you can do is maybe make a tea or a potpourri that you add some of your dried fruit to, or even some of your herbs that you might not like the way they turned out, or maybe you think that you just did them too hot and you're not going to have enough of the flavor left, so you can just add it to something that you can simmer on the stovetop to add some moisture into your house when it's dry, just to refresh the air, those kind of things. If you've got citrus that is just too brown because you dried it at too hot of a temperature, you can always, and it doesn't look good, so you don't want to store it, and maybe it doesn't taste that great to you, simmer it or add it to your tea or add it to a potpourri that you just have out. It will add much of that essence of that citrus flavor to the air, or to what you're trying to create in your environment. Something else you can do is, if you don't like it, again, for that broken up thing, you can make dips out of it super easy. So you can make yogurt dips for dipping apples or other fruits into, just blending some of those fruit chunks into your yogurt, or you can do like a sour cream based like ranch dressing kind of dip that you can make, and then do as a vegetable dip for your celery, carrots, radish, whatever you like to do that way. So making those kind of dips is a great way too to make those flaked up bits go into another use that you're not actually eating the whole vegetable. Some people actually will use some of their dried fruits that maybe they didn't like, or maybe they've used but need now a new home. A new way to use, besides just throwing them away, you can make kombucha with it. I'm not a kombucha maker, so I can't talk about this one specifically well. You can look this up, but it's a second brew that people will use those things on. Look that up. Sorry. I'll try to leave a link down below for how that works. Another thing too, especially with fruits, although I've stuck some vegetables in mine sometimes, I will put things in oatmeal that I wouldn't like to eat on their own. I will break them up, put them in oatmeal, and they're much easier for me to eat and get my my mind around the texture of a fruit that I don't particularly like dried, but if I break it up and put it in oatmeal, that makes it way easier for me to eat. So I won't not dry fruit that I wouldn't necessarily like to eat fresh or dried, because if it's a way that I can get some extra nutrients in me. All right, so another way to use anything, you can use it to color so many things. So you powder it, evidently. I mean, obviously, you would powder the thing that you want to use, but you don't necessarily have to. Sometimes just soaking it in water will bring out color, but the powder can help you make things like to be able to color like noodles or Play-Doh or yarns or anything like that. You can powder those things, add it to the doughs, and that will actually create a new color. You can do it for icing. You can do it for so many other things that you can create new colors for things. But if you want to soak it, sometimes you can just rehydrate that fruit, and sometimes it changes, or the vegetable, and it will change the watercolor, and then you can soak in it. Or if you want to create a paste that you can coat things with, like maybe you think about eggs, like if you want to do Easter eggs or dye eggs for some reason, or dye fabrics or any of those kind of things. I've even heard of somebody making a powder out of blueberry, and then using it as a really thick paste to do a temporary dye job on a little girl's hair that she wanted some streaks in her hair, and so they did that as a temporary dye job. Let's see, I'm trying to think of any other things that would pop into my head while we're doing this. There are so many ways that you can make these things work, that if you don't like them dried, just try something different with them. Don't just throw it away. If you have ideas about ways that you can use dehydrated foods, please leave those comments down in the links below. We all learn when we all participate in these videos. Yeah, it helps my algorithm to get my videos out more, but when people read the comments and they start learning from each other, it just makes a greater community of people that are learning how to preserve, learning how to put food by, learning how to stock their pantries for their families with food that they really love, which is the whole point of why I do this channel, is to help you develop those skills. So I really thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Happy dehydrating.